Welcome to the Table Podcast, where we discuss issues of God and culture. Brought to you by Dallas Theological Seminary.
Well, hello. Welcome to the Table Podcast, where we discuss issues of God and culture. My name is Bill Hendricks. I'm the Executive Director for Christian Leadership at the Hendricks Center. In 2020, the Public Religion Research Institute came out with a study that was entitled Census of American Religion 2020, and it was an unprecedented county-by-county look at religious identity and diversity in the United States. And the research found that over the last few decades, the white Christian proportion of the U.S. population has declined by nearly one-third, hitting an all-time low in 2018 of 42%. And white evangelical Protestants, which are the oldest religious group in the country, have experienced the greatest drop in affiliation over the past decade. That's shrunk from 23% in 2006 to 14% in 2020, which leads to the question that we want to discuss today on the table: why are people leaving the church? And to help us do that, it's my deep privilege to welcome and introduce Dr. Sam Perry, who is an associate professor of sociology at the University of Oklahoma. He also has his PhD from the University of Chicago and is a DTS grad, getting his THM in 2008. Sam, welcome to the Table Podcast.
It's a privilege. Thanks for having me.
So we want to get into this whole issue of why people are leaving the church, but even before we jump in there, I always like to kind of get the backstory of how what was your background, where was growing up for you, and particularly because you're a sociologist, what piqued your curiosity and an interest in pursuing sociology?
Sure. So I grew up in a Christian home. Certainly, my dad went to Dallas Seminary in the late 70s and early 80s. He and my mom met on crusade staff, and I was raised in Fellowship Bible Church in Richardson, Texas. I think, and so raised as a Christian, certainly raised in the church. By godly parents who love the Lord and were a tremendous example for me. I would say I kind of early interest in the kinds of things that I study now came from my own experience in my family. My parents adopted two African-American girls when I was 4 and 6 years old. So and they were not sisters, but they were both adopted at different times. And because we adopted my oldest adopted sister, Beth, when I was 4, I mean, I grew up never not knowing having black sisters, right? Like it was something where it was just, this was dinner table conversation for us to talk about issues of race and identity, and how people were perceiving us as a family and the various kinds of issues that we faced, and issues of prejudice. And in some ways that alienated people in my own family who were from Alabama or from different parts of the country where that was just a little bit more taboo.
Yeah.
And so I think I grew up with kind of something of a proto-sociological eye for understanding experiences of diversity and how faith shapes families and communities. And so going into college, I was a communications major. I wanted to be a pastor at the time, but I also was just fascinated by sociology because it was asking the kinds of questions that I was really asking myself my whole life about racial prejudice, race relations, and faith, and those kinds of things. And so I went to seminary at DTS, and I had a great experience at Dallas Seminary. I was a New Testament major, and was tremendously fun. Learned I had a passion for research and writing. And it was actually at that time, I think God was redirecting my own vision of my own gifting, my own understanding of gifting. I'd always loved teaching and preaching, but I think it wasn't until I came to seminary at DTS where I understood that I really enjoy research and writing, and I'm really good at it. And I think I have a gift for that kind of thing. I was counseled against getting my PhD in New Testament studies by some seminary professors who said, you may stand a better chance of finding employment. I don't even know if I should say that, but they said you stand a better chance of finding employment if you go some other route. And for me, that was easy. It was just, I love sociology. I want to pursue that, and I was fortunate to get into the University of Chicago, which is a great program. Yeah. And now University of Oklahoma was my first job out of grad school. So that's where I've been.
Of course, nowadays, a college student decides they're going to study sociology. People are like, "What do you want to be unemployed?"
Yeah, unless you get a PhD in it.
Exactly.
That's pretty true.
Well, that's fascinating. So you're a committed Christian. You've had training in theology as well as sociology. Let me ask a question, and in asking this question, I don't mean to insult your intelligence. I mean more to sort of expose my own ignorance. Define what sociology actually means and what it's all about, if you can.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and this is something I'm very cautious in explaining to my own students, because I think they come into my classes with their own perceptions of what a sociologist is and does. And some of that has been my own experience. So like I dropped my first undergraduate sociology class because the guy I took the class from, I mean, if you Google a picture of Karl Marx right now, I mean, the guy looked like Karl Marx and frankly spoke a lot like Karl Marx, or I perceived, he was a wild-eyed guy that I felt like was very, and I was a Christian in college. I mean, I felt like the guy was very antagonistic. I felt like he was provocative on purpose. I didn't feel like there was a lot of science to that social science going on. And it wasn't until I actually took some more sociology classes that I said, oh, no, this could be quite data-driven and interested in gathering evidence and information about our social world in a way that is productive and helpful. And that is the kind of sociology that I aim to do. I tell my students that I am a social scientist, that I am interested in gathering facts and information and data so that I can draw informed conclusions about how the world works. That does not necessarily mean it. And in fact, I should make that case stronger. I stress to my students that if I'm doing my job right, the information that I share should inform your faith, but it really doesn't speak to the empirical reality of your faith. It is not I don't speak in terms of ontological or epistemological truths. That's not the job of a social scientist. My job is to speak to the human side of everything that we experience and what we can gather information about or empirical evidence about. And so that's how I see sociology, as opposed to, say, something like psychology, which is focused primarily gathering information and data about how the human brain works in interaction with others. Sociology is far more interested in gathering data about society and the collective and the aggregate, and how social systems and social environments shape the individual and vice versa.
Yeah, I was going to ask how sociology contributes to a particularly Christian understanding of the world.
Yeah, I mean, I think I write about that all the time, and hopefully I'm persuasive enough to sell what I do a little bit. But I think sociology contributes to a Christian understanding of the world in that I think we get lost as Protestants and evangelical Protestants. I think we come with our own cultural predispositions to think in terms of and we're also, as Americans,
right?
We tend to value the idea of the individual as somebody who is almost in isolation, and somebody who is an agent and making decisions on their own, and that God deals with on an individual basis in their own personal faith journey. And sociologists, I think, come with a perspective. We actually we're all embedded in relationships and contexts. And those relationships and social contexts and those experiences shape the interiority of our lives, and they shape our expectations, and they shape our culture. I would say sociology has the most to contribute in terms of how Christians understand culture and understand the cultures that end up shaping us and the decisions that we make. Also, sociology powerfully shapes our understanding of human demographic processes and transitions that are powerfully shaping our own religious reality today in the United States in ways that we often don't understand. And sociology also contributes an understanding of social structure, and that is how the organization, the structural organization of our relationships, the rules, the resources, the laws and policies, they shape our own experience as individuals. And so I think we would be remiss as Christians if we did not acknowledge a lot of the truths that I think a sociological perspective can bring to the table, without becoming. I mean, and I think I get the question a lot, or at least I have, not so much anymore, but I've gotten the question before of, wow, you're a sociologist, so when did you lose your faith, or something like that?
Right.
The implication being something like, I can't imagine a sociologist and a committed believer existing in the same human person. Yeah, and I think that is because of an assumption of sociology that is unfortunate, that assumes all sociologists are secular leftists or something like that. And it also comes, I think, with an unfortunate assumption that all committed Christians must be right-wing Republicans. And yes, if that is what you believe, if that is what you understand as a Christian believer, and if that is what you understand by a sociologist, then I get why that you would feel like those two things in conflict. But there is a lot of diversity among sociologists and Christians that I think that is understood rightly. I think both can be good sociologists. Yep.
So by the name, which includes social, it sounds to me like sociology sort of forces us to get beyond our individual perspective. It reminds us that we are in relationships with a whole world of people, whole society of people, whole culture of people. And by sort of stepping back to take that more coordinated collective view, we often can see things that we would miss if we're simply in our own self-absorbed perspective and just taking care of what's in front of us.
Oh, I think that's not only just to remind us, but I think it actually is. It should correct our paradigm to understand human beings as fundamentally social creatures. That we are that there is no hypothetical individual living off on their own like a person who was raised by wolves without the influence of their parents and their community and their environment. And there are not only the influences of our kind of immediate community, but there are layers upon layers of social influence, both within our global and national and familial and community-based context that all have something to say about the kind of people that we end up being, and that we contribute to in our own ways. And so that isn't to say that human beings don't have agency. And matter of fact, This is kind of one of the constant sociological conversations of to what extent do human beings have agency and contribute to their own futures, and to what extent is there a social structure that is so determinative in the kinds of things we end up being. And there's an appropriate middle, complicated kind of nexus of individuals making decisions and empowered by God to be agents and to make voluntary choices. And at the same time, doing that within a context that constrains a lot of those choices and their information.
That's fascinating. Well, today we want to focus that inquiry specifically on the choices that people make, whether to identify as Christians or not. And that what's interesting is that fewer and fewer people are doing that. The number of religiously unaffiliated Americans, so-called nones, is actually on the rise now, and it hovers around 23 to 25% of the population. I'm curious to the extent you're in touch with that development, and if so, what's behind those numbers? How do we have the percentage of Christians sort of diminishing in the big picture, while people of no faith or not necessarily not of faith, but not of the Christian faith or any other, sort of designated religion seems to be growing now upwards to a quarter of the population,
right? And
particularly among younger people.
Yes. So I think there's a lot of information out there, and so I'm happy to kind of share the available data, like what I think social scientists are able to kind of discern with broader aggregate surveys and the kinds of trends that we see. I will say, I think a truth that needs to be brought up, and we're not remotely the first people to ask that question, but I think a great book that I want to plug here, back from the early '90s, Exit Interviews from Bill Hendricks is on my shelf, and
wow,
an important truth that you I think drive home from your own interviews toward the conclusion of the book is that there is no one reason that people leave the church, and there are multiple stories, and people are individuals, and each individual has their own kind of story and experience. And so we should be cautious about kind of like speaking so confidently in the aggregate that we just kind of explain away everybody's experience. And so I think that was an important point to recognize in your book. And I think it's still true 30 years later, subsequently. I think some new developments, though, in terms of this process. One, we should observe that what is taking place in the United States is actually a delayed process of what has gone on in Western societies for a long time, like a gradual process of secularization, and not just secularization as in like the institutions of our society are gradually becoming disestablished or disconnected from any kind of religious faith, but that individuals are, say, attending church less or more likely to identify as nothing in particular. We don't see a really rapid rise in, say, atheists and agnostics. I mean, I think Gallup has come out with some recent data to suggest that has seen an uptick recently, but other data sources don't suggest that this has been driven by atheists and agnostics. It's been more people just disaffiliating and saying I'm nothing in particular. It doesn't necessarily mean that they are, and as you point out in your book 30 years ago, what we're seeing now, I mean, is similar in that we don't necessarily see that people are not praying or not interested in spiritual things, or that they don't believe anything at all. Actually, the percentage of Americans who believe in life after death has stayed flat. It's right around in the 70s, and it doesn't move, and it doesn't even move among young people. So that is kind of almost a core belief that does not change. But we do see a disconnect from, say, formal religious affiliation, and that being kind of a leading identity. So there's a couple of things going on there. One that I think is a relatively, I don't mean a new development, but I think one that we are now coming to grips with, and this is kind of just becoming clearer, is something called the backlash hypothesis, and that is a result of, if I could back up a little bit, if we could think of secularization in terms of our religious identities becoming less salient in terms of the primary identities that organize all of our other identities. So it used to be the case where, I mean, Americans were divided up into Protestant, Catholic, and Jew, and like these were kind of central identities. And not only just Protestant, but like the denomination that you were involved with. These were important identities. You were a member of the Methodist Church, and that was something that mattered to you, and it distinguished, and you didn't marry Presbyterians or something like that. You know what I mean? Like it was something that was a central organizing identity. And those kinds of identities cut across politics in ways that they do not now. I have some data on this that I share with my students. In the 1970s, there was a nearly identical percentage of evangelicals in the Democratic Party as were in the Republican Party. Like you stood to be just as likely to be an evangelical among the Democrats as among the Republicans. What has taken place within the last 4 decades, within my own lifetime, is that there has been an increasing process of political sorting to where our political identities and our ideological identities, liberal, conservative, Republican, and Democrat, have become the primary identities that are organizing all of our other social identities. That includes religion. To where you've got conservative Christians who are becoming more not only just aligned with the Republican Party and conservative politics, but everybody knows it, right? Like that's becoming something that is common. White conservative Christians are Republicans. They tend to vote that way, and that's kind of how they identify. What that has brought about among young people in particular, and there's actually been a variety of different studies. You can see this in a variety of different data sets. You can see it in experimental data. You can see it in survey data that follows people over a period of time. that young people are making a conscious choice as they go into college, and young people tend to be a little bit more progressive in their views and the society that we grow up in. And young people are making choices about the kind of people that they're going to be religiously throughout the rest of their lives. And they are saying, well, if being a Christian means being a right-wing conservative, or the kind of person that my granddad is or my parents were, then I'm going to go a different direction. Like, this is something that I'm going to disengage from. I'd rather be something else. And so we can actually track that over a period of time, and that is in fact what we have seen is young people in particular are choosing their politics before they choose. And this is happening across America, but like they choose their politics before their faith identity solidifies in terms of how they want to be moving forward. They go to college, and it's not just college. It's about kind of coming out of your parents' household. And they engage in the kind of the traditional process of what we call institutionalized deviance, where they go to church a little bit less because they're young people, they're out from under their parents' shelter. And historically, they always came back, right? Like, they got married, they got families, they got plugged into middle-class life, they came back to church. And that was just kind of a pattern that reproduced itself. Nowadays, because of this kind of political backlash thesis, you have young people who are saying, if that is what religion is, and I have to be that, and you actually have people who are saying that, then that is not the kind of faith experience that I'm interested in. And so they don't walk away from any kind of faith or religious belief, but they walk away from formal affiliation in a way that I think has long-term consequences. And that has long-term consequences to the extent that they are raising their kids now in a family that is not connected to. So it's a cyclical thing, and it actually becomes something that is self-reinforcing. Like, the more young people walk away now, the more likely they are to have smaller families, but also raise their families disconnected from church at all, to where that's just never been something that these young kids have experienced at all. And it's something that is foreign to them.
Right.
And it becomes something that's kind of a self-fulfilling, not a self-fulfilling prophecy, but something that's cyclical, and it ramps up.
Yeah, it feeds on itself. You know, this term nuns is so fascinating to me because in all of this research that the sociologists do, demographers do, they talk about people who identify as, Christian or non-Christian or atheist or whatever, and then people who identify as nuns. I don't know. To me, there's a certain sort of inherent contradiction of terms there. Like, my identity is nun. Like, I'm not this, I'm not that, but there's no sort of positive affirmation of here's what I am, and here's what I do believe, and here's what I stand for, and here's what I'm committed to. And, and I get the feeling that there's just a lot of people out there that, as you point out, they've looked at what they've been offered and say, well, that's not it for me. And from there, it's a smorgasbord, like all bets are off on where they're going to land, if they land. And so there's a lot of people just wandering around.
Well, I think that category of nothing in particular, or the nuns, is actually a good indication of kind of what I'm talking about. So, like, as young Americans, other identities are now taking the place of what used to be our primary identities, and that was kind of like religion, family, community. Right. Now it's become kind of nationalized politics, and that is who you are, like where you kind of fall along that spectrum. So you have a situation in which these people aren't like they aren't self-consciously secular people. In other words, if you ask them, like, are you a secular person? They might not say, they might even know what to do with that, because they don't kind of feel it's no longer a master identity to them. It's just kind of like something that they don't think about a lot. They would rather emphasize other identities in their own lives because they don't feel connected to a formal religious organization. Matter of fact, they're feeling kind of soured on that. Some of it may be, as you pointed out in your book 30 years ago. I mean, I've conducted surveys with my own undergraduate students about their own religious journey and where they are. And some of them do point to kind of like scandals or some kind of moral failure in the church that they feel turned off by. Right. My guess, though, is that I think for a lot of them, the process of identity transition takes place a lot sooner. And they look at scandals in the church as kind of a convenient, like, oh yeah, that's the reason. That's reason enough. That's justification enough for me to feel good about this slow drift. And in fact, like I've asked students, those students who have said that they are less religious now than they were as young people before college. I asked them, was it a conscious decision for you to move away from your religious faith, or was it more of a slow, unconscious drift? And about 2/3 of them say it was more of an unconscious drift.
Well, that's
away.
And that mirrors that C.S. Lewis line about very few people suddenly decide I'm not going to believe in God anymore. It's a slow drifting away.
Yeah.
So when we look at these macro trends, well, let me ask this question first, because it's the question I'm sure people in your shoes always get asked, and I suppose it's a bit of a trick question. So is everybody, in talking about these things, I hear people say, well, the real problem is social media. And I often wonder, so is social media the cause here that's accelerated something that was there, or is it actually more of a symptom of what was going on elsewhere, and just happened to show up with the technology in time to catch that wave?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's it's a both and. I think it's both. It is both an amplifier of trends that have already been taking place, because kind of what I've been talking about, and it's both an amplifier and it's a symptom. So I'll speak to both of those. So it's an amplifier in the sense that the broader sorting trends that we have seen, I think people respond on social media because social media is very polarized, and it gives a false impression that Americans are a lot more polarized than they are. That is kind of a like there is all kinds of talk about social media being an echo chamber where you hear these kinds of like really only one-sided narratives and that kind of thing. Really, what social media is very good at, because it's only the loudest, most polarized people who consistently post on social media. So, for example, Twitter or something like that. Most people don't post on Twitter. Most people lurk on Twitter. Most people are just kind of reading what's going on. If you're only reading and not really contributing because you're a moderate and you don't really care, and you don't really care, but you don't have like strong opinions, or you don't feel informed enough, is what you're hearing is you're only hearing the most dogmatic and angry and polarized and loud megaphone voices talk about how these two groups of people hate each other, and how like these two groups are polar opposite and there is no middle in between them. And so what that becomes is it becomes a powerful sorting mechanism to say, okay, who do I identify with, and which tribe is my kind of people? So social media has amplified that organization where politics and identity now sort where you are religiously, especially for young people. So if you have any kind of religious faith convictions and you are somebody who subscribes to traditional views on the family or those kinds of things, well, then you quickly learn that there is only one group for me, and everybody else is anathema and they're demonic and they're Luciferian, I think is the most recent word. and if you have more progressive views on those kinds of things, well, then you learn quickly, like, I have no more place any longer among religious Americans. My group of people is the liberal church or progressive whatever, or just seculars in general. So social media in that sense has amplified the sorting, and they've catalyzed it in that way. But social media is also a symptom of our broader addiction to inattention, and it is a way that capitalism has, I think, leveraged some very foundational tendencies that we as human beings have to enjoy distraction and to play around on our phones like they're slot machines, and kind of like get likes and retweets and to kind of build identities and test our identities on social media. I mean, it's one of those things that one of my previous books was about how committed Christians experience pornography in their own lives. And one of the things that I found in that study was that evangelical Christians are just as likely to be on their phones and on social media and connected to the internet as anybody else. Mm-hmm. Like they are no less likely to be on the internet, to be online, to be at their phones constantly. And so one of the problems that Christians face, even with kind of say like struggles with pornography, is the fact that conservative Christians are just like everybody else in that we are always almost like cyborgs attached to our phones.
Always wired.
And if it wasn't pornography, it would be some other kind of like click addiction.
Right.
Like it would be social media. It would be posting things.
Online
it would
game,
be kind
whatever.
of mindlessly scrolling and that kind of thing. And part of the connection or the challenge of detaching young people away from, say, pornography is actually a broader problem with detaching them away from just addiction to screens and clicking and all of the things that compete for your attention. So that is a symptom of like a broader problem.
Wow. I mean, I was going to ask you, and you're kind to mention a book that I wrote 30 years ago. But I must say, after I write exit interviews, and then, I don't know, 10 or 15 years later, the Reveal study comes out from Willow Creek, and I read through that, and I'm like, I kind of said that 15 years ago, and then, right. And then, we get to the Barna study, 2019 church dropouts have risen to 64%, and Pew Research, and I'm like, okay, so this is a trend that's been going on a while, with right. people drifting away from churches. I guess the question then it looms, why has the church not been able to turn this around? I mean, it's not like this is a new thing that we're just figuring out. I mean, there's been a big backdoor to the church for quite some time. And it doesn't seem like anything's really stemmed that tide. And I'm just curious, if you have any research or thoughts about, why that might be.
So I think one of the challenges, and I think a great new book that has just come out recently by religion journalist Bob Smetia. I'm not even sure, Smetana, but it's called Reorganized Religion. I want to make sure I get that right. I'm listening to it on Audible right now, and he covers all of these kinds of broader trends. Reorganized Religion, I'll read the subtitle. The Reshaping of the American Church and Why It Matters. And he's done all of these interviews, and he looks at a lot of data. He's a great religion journalist. The last name is Smietana.
Thank you.
Bob. And one of the observations that he makes, and I think this is a spot-on observation, is what has been going on. A sociologist has been observing this as well. What we're actually seeing, there has been a trend in church culture, and I mean, Dallas is on the forefront of this, course. But with kind of the Walmartization of congregations to where mega churches are growing, the phenomenon of satellite churches. And I know they've tried to suppress this a little bit by kind of spinning these things off and giving these things kind of pastors and individual communities, kind of like the villages, like Bethlehem in Minnesota and other places. But it doesn't change the fact that a smaller number of churches are now housing a larger number of Christians. And the mom and pop churches, those small community churches that were in your local community, are now being driven out.
Yeah.
And they're no longer a thing. So it's kind of a big box phenomenon. And so on the one hand, you could see this as a positive that more and more people are able to go to these churches and they provide great programs. They have great resources. They obviously, I think wise people are at those churches too. I don't mean to trash those places. And yet it is obviously easier within those larger megachurch contexts to be anonymous, to be a free rider, to be a taker, to come and not invest. I do think you have some churches, like I think Watermark is an example of that kind of like holds as a standard of church membership. Like for you to be a member, you have to re-up every year. You have to be involved in service. You have to be in a community group. Like I think that is a way that people try to fight this tendency. But I think all that to say, like, in our hyper-connected, very, very busy lives, where my kids are involved in 5 different things apiece, and we're running them to and from everything, and church just becomes one more thing. To the extent that I'm not really connected personally, my identity is not connected with that community, and I'm very anonymous, and I'm kind of on the fringes, then it's easy for me to put that down and just walk away and get involved in something else. I think that has been going on for a long time now. And I think COVID certainly was threw gasoline on that fire.
Yes.
Because it just created a 2-year window almost in which people
figured out they had other options.
Yeah, they got to taste on Sunday what it's like to sleep in and do other things and go fishing and travel out of town and travel for soccer or kids or whatever.
And the convenience of watching the service in your pajamas.
Right.
With a cup of coffee.
And I'm sure I don't have to tell pastors this, but I mean, obviously that comes at the cost of people saying, well, I think I'm just going to kind of keep doing this. And I don't feel like I've disrupted my pattern and now I have another pattern. And I think that has really not only consequences for those people's immediate spiritual lives, but the lives of their children and their children's children as this becomes a generational thing where people are no longer growing up with faith.
So as we're having this conversation, it's occurring to me that the role of sociologists in our culture may be not dissimilar to what the role of journalists in an earlier time was, which was basically, we just giving you the facts. Here's what happened, and we're just reporting what's actually going on. But I at the same time, I can't imagine that you as a sociologist merely want to be sort of a spectator and a reporter, and let the chips fall where they may. And do sociologists ever get to the point where they're going, in light of these facts, here's some things you might want to think about doing. And I guess where I wanted to go was, as we've talked about this decline and people leaving churches, and again, particularly younger demographics. Any thoughts you have about the implications of this? If we apply it down to back to the smaller unit, here's an individual family,
right?
A couple trying to raise their children, or even a single parent trying to raise their children. That sort of scenario. And then, of course, here is a pastor, and he may be in a multi-staff church, but that leadership team is thinking, man, we got to shut the back door here. What are we going to do? Any thoughts about what we might offer to parents and to church leaders?
Oh, that's great. I think that's a great question. I mean, it is one of these challenges because I think some of these challenges that churches face, they didn't create. You know what I mean? So it's unfair in some ways to say, you pastors, you faith leaders, you seminary professors, you need to solve the problems that are broader, even global challenges that now face these faith communities. And in some ways, it is not a situation in which we can, as churches, go back to some other time,
right,
where it was just better. It's actually it is adjusting to a new reality. Mm-hmm. And so that is probably the more important question of how do we adjust to this new reality where and there are some things that we can correct. And so I don't mean to kind of like just say throw my hands up in the air. There are some things that actually I think are certainly proactive. But how do we adjust to this new reality where we undeniably live in a more secular society? That there are frankly just more options, and so I don't know if the best option is to do the Benedict option and just to create these kinds of that is, I think, antithetical to the evangelical identity that we want to be forces for good, that we want to be people who are shaping the world in a positive way and with the gospel, with love, with our own kind of families and mission. That Jesus said that we're not supposed to be taken out of the world, and we're not supposed to be of the world. We're supposed to be into the world. So what does it mean to be into the world now in this new context? And I think I think that in many ways, I think we have to take a good hard look. I mean, I think one of the things that is undeniably driving young people away from the church is, I think, an uncritical conflation of politics and religion. In ways that this is not to say that Christians ought to be politically agnostic or that disengaged. I've never said that. I never want to imply that Christians have to check their politics or not bring their faith into their own political values. Of course they do. But to the extent that where like it is becoming a common truism that if you are a committed Christian, you vote this way always, and you have no other options, and you don't question who is the leader. It's just kind of like you don't question the coach. You're just a part of the team. Like that I think is problematic, because I think people read that and they make decisions about Jesus before they actually get a chance to encounter Jesus people.
Right.
I think that's a hugely problematic thing culturally. And I do think there is a reinvestment that needs to be made in authentic faith communities and families, raising those kinds of resources. I think mega churches and mega church culture needs to reconsider what kind of trends that they're a part of, and how we have, I think, built monuments to egos and kind of like broader movements rather than investing in smaller communities that may not be so financially rich, and yet they are more nimble to be able to meet the needs of families and invest in those kinds of communities in more proactive ways.
Well, I know one issue that young people in particular, again, you would know the facts of this better than I would, but at least everything I've seen and read, an issue that's very much a hot button is justice issues. It could be human trafficking, it could be racism, it could be economic injustice, all kinds of possibilities. But it does seem to me that, first of all, the Bible and our Lord had a whole lot to say that speaks into justice, and that seems like a good place to start with some meaningful conversations and even action steps to show. Again, let's just say nuns, which are quite possibly kids who grew up in a Christian home and now they've kind of drifted away. But if somebody said, we're doing something related to justice, you might be interested in checking this out. We want you to at least get your voice in the conversation. There might be some interest in, maybe there's more here than I thought.
Yeah, I mean, I think that has to be, I think that should emerge as a part of the Christian identity in a way that it now is perceived as something that is more optional, that some churches are into. Some churches are into justice, other churches are into small groups. Like it's something that is just kind of like a fad thing or something that they're into that season. Like this year we're into justice.
Yeah, that's not going to work. Right.
That is not going to work because I mean, people immediately acknowledge that is a tack on, that is inauthentic, that is not something that is a core part of their identity. I'll put it this way. I think this is a good way to put it. So, if I were to talk to a group of, I think really committed pro-life Christians, and I were to say, the hardcore pro-life thing is not a winning kind of issue for you guys. I mean, like people, it's a minority view, and this is something that the wider culture is going to frown upon. I think they would respond with, we don't care what the rest of the world thinks. This is right? Like this is right. This is a part of our identity. This is who we are. We are pro-life, and I think we need to move to that kind of understanding of a Christian's commitments to, say, justice issues, is that, whether it's popular or not, whether the progressives or whether society or whether the media picks up on that and notices and they give us applause for it and the people start coming back because they recognize, like, whether anybody notices or not, I think it just becomes it needs to be a part of our identity because it's right. Because that is what Jesus would have taught or taught. Not would have. That is what Jesus taught, and so to the extent that can actually become a fully formed part of our own community identity, that this is who we are as a people, I think that is not only good for the church because it is something that people will see, but even more important, it is because it is righteous. It is Christ-like and holy.
Well, and of course the context in which we have to wrap that is the way that we communicate that also has to be in a Christ-like tone, so that
Yes.
We don't bring this defiance and this, in your face kind of thing. We're going to do what's right, and we come across as Pharisees. But more,
yes.
We do this because this is the right thing to do, because this is what our Lord is telling us to do. We're
Right.
sad that you don't agree.
Right.
We don't agree with you, but it's a big world, and we understand you're not with us, but we're going to do our thing and let the chips fall where they may. And by the way, we're going to pray for you, and we're going to love on you, and we're going to do what we can to help you flourish, just like we're trying to help ourselves.
And that right there, I think, Bill, is a commitment not only to the ends but to the means. And
Yes.
I think both of those are central, because I think it is unfortunate that I think committed Christians, I think especially, have gotten the reputation for this within the last 10 years of being willing to sacrifice the means to accomplish the ends, and to say whatever gets the job done, and we're going to be willing to do that. And I think that has been a disaster.
That's been a losing strategy for sure.
It is, and absolutely is. I mean, it's something that you end up making a Faustian bargain.
Yep.
To say, if I can just have that victory, that W, then I am willing to compromise in this area. And it is something that I think, if we are committed to, I think, as you're describing, a vision for kind of certainly values and justice and all of the things that we believe are central to what it means to live as a Christian in today's world. I think it also requires a commitment to sacrificial love, a commitment to turning the other cheek, a commitment to forgiveness and to winsomeness in a way that we believe Jesus did while he was here, and he taught. And I think that is, and again, it's not just good because that's a winning strategy. It's good because it's righteous. It's good because it would be good if it was a losing strategy. You know what I mean? Like it would.
Yes.
It would be good if
it is truly the right thing to do.
Exactly.
So again, for our listeners to the table, we put together there, we've got to show courage. We've got to stand up for what is right and true and biblical, and then do it in a compassionate way. That we're the hands, the feet, the heart of Jesus to the world. And Sam Perry, thank you for bringing your, pardon me. Thank you for bringing your expertise in sociology to bear on this question of why people are leaving the church. This has just been so instructive and insightful today, and I can see we need to have you back for lots of other issues that really need to be considered through a lens of sociology as well as theology. I want to thank all of you for listening to the Table Podcast today. Be sure and subscribe to us on your favorite podcast stream, and join us the next time for the Table Podcast. I'm Bill Hendricks.
Thanks for listening to the Table Podcast. Dallas Theological Seminary. Teach truth, love well.